Good afternoon. Welcome to this very important session. It is how we can also make sure that trade works even more in the interest of global goods, but also sustainability. We know that trade is incredibly important for the global growth. We are expecting 3.4% growth in trade this year. It's picking up, but we also know there is an intersection between trade and sustainability. And how can we better use trade also for then underpinning what we need to see more of decarbonization in the economy? Today, sometimes countries put tariffs on those things that we need for the energy transition and for decarbonization. So that can be more expensive than less environmentally friendly solutions. How can we use also the World Trade Organization and trade negotiations to make sure that we have a level playing field? Sometimes we should even create more, that we should incentivize things that are securing our planet from not getting on fire. We have big discussions, as we know, in Europe about the CBAM, the carbon adjustment tax. We also have that now in the US. There is signs that the US also can move into this. As I said, we have a great panel. We have Secretary John Kerry here, Senator for almost 30 years, but also then Secretary of State and also then the climate envoy until a few months ago. We have Laurence Tobiana, Chief Executive Officer, European Climate Foundation, but has been a big supporter of nature and climate for the last decades. Let's say at least we worked together on these topics for the last 3 decades. And we have Katrin Feingold, Deputy President, International Trade Union Confederation. And we know how important the trade unions also are in this. So maybe let me start with you, Secretary Kerry. Border carbon taxes. What does that really mean? Does it, is this something you think also after the elections will be introduced in the US like we have seen in Europe? The CBAM will be up and running and implemented in 26. And of course, if the US does the same, it's not uncontroversial, especially with the Global South, but I think it's a possible consensus, because we know these things are one of the few areas where we can see a little bit of bipartisan in the US.
Yes, I think, Borge, and thanks for inviting us to this session. I think the science and the challenges of climate are growing sufficiently that people in the world know that we have to do more than we're doing today. And so what is that more? I think the CBAM is actually, I mean, I've had reservations about it initially a few years ago when it first bounced around, but we're seeing countries that are abusing agreed upon approaches to this challenge. Witness, you know, in Dubai, everybody agreed we're going to transition away from fossil fuel, but we're not. People aren't doing that. And so our workers, and a lot of workers where people are doing what they were supposed to do, are hugely disadvantaged as a result by goods that come in here, but people who just burn coal or do whatever they want, or aren't at least even showing that they're willing to adopt a sort of sensible path. So as a result, I think it is gaining some traction. I think that I just met with a bunch of senators here in New York, actually, in the last few days, and they're all really, on a bipartisan basis, thinking very seriously about implementing it. So Bottom line, it would be better if we didn't have to do that, but we have an unfair trade mechanism structure globally, and the WTO is teetering, to say the least, and I think we're going to have some very serious trade conversations starting, obviously, after the American election.
There's a lot of talk about tariffs in your elections. It seems like there is 20%, 50%, 100%. But if there was a carbon border adjustment tax, could that levy be used for decarbonization purposes, or would that never work? Would there not be?
Well, no, it's possible that you could work a structure like that. You know, what we really need on a global basis is to price carbon. That's the single most impactful thing that we could choose to do as a group of nations around the planet. It's not about to happen, and that's a challenge. But the tariff thing, I think, is even more of a challenge in a lot of ways. I mean, first of all, I don't think that our former president, who wants to go back, I don't think he understands what tariffs are or how they work. Either that, or he's once again not telling the truth to people, because he said, "Oh, China will pay it. You know, you're not going to pay it." But everybody who's honest about it, or everybody who actually knows what they're talking about, will tell you, your consumers pay for it. It's a tax that's being levied on your folks. It gets passed on to you. So it's not the smartest way to go. And obviously, if you look at what's happening, we need to excite green products being moved and traded and sold and so forth. And in some cases, given to people in Global South, et cetera, in order to rectify. I mean, we did agree not only to transition away from fossil fuel, we agreed to do it in a way that's fair, equitable, and orderly. So you've got to put that into the equation, which means paying attention to Global South. But I just think that the WTO is troubled right now, deeply troubled. Some would call it moribund, some would use other adjectives. But the bottom line is we've had the most vast dumping regarding any one product in solar panels and solar goods from one country, and it basically stole the entire industry from the United States and Germany. And all of this happened quite a few years ago and for a period of time, but it's left us with a complete imbalance in supply chains and in our ability to be able to address the climate challenge.
So, Laurence, what we might see here is like a green trade conflict. Is that possible to avoid, or is your view that you have to crush some eggs to make omelette?
I think initially when CBAM, for example, was presented, Europe faced a big backlash. That was understandable. It was more difficult for many countries to export to Europe. But what I see is an interesting evolution, because as John said, we don't have a global carbon price. But the fact that some countries are moving forward with something which will be an equivalent of a carbon price in-house, and in a way putting that on the global market, you see that I see totally different reactions these days. Many ministers come to me to say how we could use this CBAM, how we could use this carbon tax mechanism for us. And I'm sure that pretty soon China or India or South Africa or Egypt will use and put an export tax to recover the revenues and in a way begin to decarbonize their own industry. It's absolutely non-perfect. It would be so good and so better to have an harmonization of the carbon price with, of course, maybe nuances. But it is what it is. And we can, I think, initially when I was discussing in the government about putting this carbon border adjustment mechanism, the initial idea was to give back a big amount of these resources. And it was good, meaning we were helping countries to adjust. Unfortunately, because of the crisis, the different crises and the problem of the fiscal space and the inflation, It's very difficult to say to European government today, no, this money will go outside. But I think this is a logic. We should absolutely use at least part of these revenues to go back to the exporters, at least the developing countries one, so they can improve their value chain. The second element which I see now a little bit more interest, and I would be really curious to listen to everybody, is that we recognize that we need to make the polluter principle much more applicable. I think John has taken very vigorously about the oil and gas sector this week. They are not paying tax. They are not paying for the pollutants they produce. So I think there is a number of issues where people pay their tax in countries. They sometimes pay much more than the one who pollute more. And some sectors they escape largely to this polluter principle. And I think that's something which I think is open to discussion nowadays. And finally now, when being on climate, you see that trade policy will be part of the discussion now for the rest of the time.
So what do you say, though, to a developing country that have mainly coal used for the coal-fired power plants, and they then use that for producing aluminum and steel, and they say, no, we have to close because we will, after the carbon tax is carbon border tax is introduced in EU, we have no chance because our products will then be much more expensive. You went through this development phase yourself, but now when you're rich, you can put this carbon adjustment tax on us. What do you say to them?
Well, that's why I said that we have to pay attention to the fair and equitable component of our pledge. And it has to be done in a way that is fair and equitable. What does that mean? That means that a country like mine that has a $28.5 trillion economy, and a country like China, which has not wanted to own up to any responsibility on this, but which is an $18 trillion economy, second largest in the world, we have benefited through the years, and we need to help those countries to be able to make that transition. So you can cushion that. There are a number of different ways to cushion it. UAE, to its great credit, has put a $5 billion fund together, and the Altera fund on the outside of that, which is a $25 billion fund, specifically targeting, and they're very serious about targeting the global south, the developed world. In addition, I've put forward an idea when I was the special envoy, of having of allowing a very circumscribed but nevertheless well-defined with significant environmental guardrails offset or credit, which would provide cash. And that cash can become the concessionary funding that allows new energy to be affordable for those developing countries. So you can de-risk. You can show a level of engagement. If we just did it and we don't pay attention to the challenge of developing countries, shame on us. But that's not what I'm proposing, and I think most people would say. We have an obligation here to try to make up for other folks, to help them leapfrog. You can't just say, go do it on your own. We've got to help those countries leapfrog. And I think we can. I think this could actually become a virtuous, major step forward in the relationship between countries, so we begin to feel better about the challenge of converting and of accelerating the energy transition is what it's all about.
Just a short follow-up on this, and my question then go to you, Laurence, before I go to you, Catherine. In the Kyoto mechanism, we had this CDMs, this green mechanism, where you could invest from a developed country into a developing country in, for example, upgrading or with abating technologies and etc. Could you see this being part of this also CBAM and the border adjustment taxes on climate? Because that will increase, of course, the revenues to the government, but it could also be used for this green mechanism that could support developing countries that are specifically hard hit, so they can get the technology transfer, and then they can be in a situation where they can pay less. There will be less levy or taxes on their export.
No, you're totally right, and I think it's absolutely possible. Again, we are at a very difficult economic moment, but that will not stay forever. Interest rates are going down, inflation is going down, and I think we will see more space for this solidarity discussion that we had in the last 5 years. Hopefully, Ukraine war will end. I'm crossing fingers, we don't know when. But then that changed the perspective, at least for the European side. I think effectively these mechanisms that were finally forgotten, like CDM, could be brought back. And that's a discussion we'll have for the finance discussion in Baku and in Belém. And we need, of course, to generate the resources. CBAN could be a part, or other sources to reconvening the funding for this transformation in countries. I'm struck by the fact, but John knows that even better than me. You have cement factories in India that are more low carbon than the European one. So one told me yesterday, so should I be paid for that? Should we give me? You know, it will open a big discussion. And I think it's very healthy. And so we need to generate public resources, that's for sure. That's why, of course, John mentioned this element of trying to generate resources out of carbon reduction. But CDM was finally a very good product in many places. Now, of course, China will not be the main recipient because it doesn't need to, but many others, Egypt, for example, others. So I see a new way with all the instruments we have, but I think CBAM finally will signal a carbon price that could be useful in the end.
So, Katrin Feingold, you're representing a lot of workers around the world. There has been this notion that the green transformation, decarbonization, can create millions of new jobs, and in renewables, it's more job creating than the traditional fossil fuel jobs. But at the same time, we're also hearing now that this discussion about level playing field and the carbon border tax adjustments. Well, what's your reflections on this?
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think this is such an exciting moment because we're seeing coming together trade policy, climate policy, industrial policy, and then I would add the need for labor policy, right? You need to have all of these policies working together. And it's really the first time we're having these conversations and it's all being connected. You really cannot pull this thread on climate policy without asking the question you just asked me, what about the workers? And I would say a couple things. In the U.S., we started asking new questions in this administration about workers and about climate, and that has gotten us to some new conversations. I just want to pick up one thread that the Secretary said, because I agree on CBAM. One of the questions I have is, no one in the United States, at least in my movement or around the world, is really familiar with what a CBAM is. It's been mostly a European conversation. We're still trying to get in our movement and with workers around the world, what's the Inflation Reduction Act? What's the clean energy transition mean for you? And so we have a lot of work to do to address the reality of our political economies, right? So we have these great policy tools that we're trying to figure out how to build. We call them guardrails. How are you building guardrails to create that level playing field for workers so that we have both good policies that work for workers and the environment? But I think we suffer right now for some challenges in our political economy. The reality is workers haven't quite seen the benefits yet of these policies. We know they're good. We know they need to urgently happen for them. And so that's why we always center our discussion around what I just started by saying, a just transition, right? You need to make sure that in all of these conversations in the U.S., if we're going to talk about a CBAM, you need to start bringing unions and workers to the table to talk about what that would look like in their industries. We started with the global arrangement on steel. So that was one sector that has started the conversation in the U.S. That conversation started due to overcapacity issues, right? It became such a large issue that our steelworker union had to deal with it because of the competition. So where we're going with this with our members, and just for the International Trade Union Confederation represents 200 million unionized workers around the world, is trying to walk a line between the U.S. and the EU and countries like South Africa and other countries that are questioning how do we ensure that all of these policies you are talking about, these guardrails, lead to a just transition. And for us, that means sitting down with employers, governments, and unions and figuring out how do you get that worker off of that fossil fuel job. It's not going to happen magically, and there's a reality of making sure that that worker then doesn't feel like they are no longer part of, benefiting from their democratic institutions. And so that's the policies that we're trying to work on. I think we need to be very mindful as we go forward with conversations of CBAM, that it's accompanied with real-time conversations of climate financing for countries like South Africa, other countries that are asking, how are we going to do this? How are we going to work up our supply chain? How do we have new models around mining that isn't just the old extractive that's, dirty and bad for workers? So,
and I guess I understood that fracking is a big thing here too in the election campaign, isn't it? Or maybe not anymore.
Because
not anymore. I would say critical minerals is more.
Mission accomplished.
So you become a fracking fan now.
Fracking freak.
So you can reflect on that, Secretary Kerry. Laurence, you asked for the floor.
Yeah, because I think Catherine mentioned that, of course, there is this decarbonization in Europe, elsewhere, not at the same reason. But at the same time, there is a profound solidarity, whether we like it or not. We are in a global economy. The technology is global, more and more. If I remember the fact that when ETS, meaning the carbon price in Europe on power, was set up, it created an enormous market for China, as John mentioned. Now we have this big issue about the critical material. How we redefine in a moment where there is more industrial policy than before, it is not just go to the market and we'll see what happens. So it's more a managed economy in each region. How we can build a codependency that is a cooperative one. Mm-hmm. And it's a fantastic opportunity because industrialization in Chile, in South Africa, in Congo, the issue is not just to come back to the extractive economy. We have to get the value added there. And I think at the same time, we see the trade will be everywhere. Just transition will be everywhere, as you said. But at the moment, we have to redefine this relation. And WTO instruments, of course, are not for the moment up to that game. But I think for that reason, it opens a space. If we get everybody around the table, we can do something much better than the actual world order.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, on some of the conversation around critical minerals and extractives, I think we've heard some big announcements here this week around the Mineral Security Partnership, which is a U.S. EU partnership among other countries as well. And I would say one concern from the labor movement still doesn't have great stakeholder input, so we could sort of improve upon that. But I also think it's a great opportunity for us to sit down with Chile, with Indonesia, with I know we conversations around Angola this week. Bring people around the table to say, what should this partnership look like in your country? What is that new model? How do you go from really bad extractive models? We keep talking about we want a value-based, a different model that makes us different, right? That builds out standards. Well, we can't do that magically. You have to do that asking people in those countries. And I think in a lot of those countries, they'd love some processing jobs. They don't want all of the processing to go to China. In mining, absolutely. So I think there's an opportunity here as we continue to talk the Mineral Security Partnership. What does that look like? How do you bring stakeholders in? It has right now a pretty weak ESG discussion. How do you strengthen that so that the countries that are involved in providing the critical minerals can actually see that this clean energy transition could be about them? Could be that it creates a good future with jobs with dignity, as well as greening their environment so that they have a healthy community to live in.
John, you want to respond to that?
Well, no, I agree, but I appreciate enormously the articulate voice for the working folks who have really gotten, pressured over these last years, to say the least. But I do think, there's a lack of adequate communication or adequate, democracies around the world now are struggling with the absence of a sort of truth arbiter. And there's no one who defines what the facts really are. The facts are that 85% of the money from the Inflation Reduction Act has gone to red states.
Right.
The facts are that Texas today is the largest renewable energy entity in America. And the facts are that there is an incredible amount of synergy between extraction of gas, or oil, gas mostly here now, and the potential of extraction from geothermal and these other possibilities. The same disciplines, the same workers can go to work in that. So we're kidding people. You know, this really doesn't have to be a difficult, complicated transition. It's made difficult by political resistance. It's made difficult by ignorance, in some cases, of people who don't want to look at the facts. This is driven by science. It's driven by physics. It's not a matter of liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, or anything. It's based on what Mother Nature is telling us every single day is happening to the planet, and will get worse. So if we can get people to sort of more massively see and understand the benefits that are at large here, healthcare systems are going to get just imploded with the continued problems that are coming. 7 million people a year die right now from bad air quality. Diseases are exacerbated, emphysema, heart disease, whatever, because we have crappy air. And that comes from coal, principally, not exclusively, but principally. And so if we can get, you know, to strip away some of the fear-mongering that's taking place and get down to the realities of what's here for people, this is the biggest economic opportunity. Meeting the challenge of the climate crisis is the biggest economic opportunity the planet has known since the Industrial Revolution, literally. Everything has to be changed. Look at we don't have a grid in America. We can't send an electron from New York to California. We can go to Mars, we can go to the moon, but we can't send a bloody electron from one part of the country to another when we need to. And we have 2,000 gigawatts of energy backed up at FERC. Can't get the permitting. We have permitting for, I mean, one of the problems that wind has run into is, again, delays in permitting, backlash, with the result that the costs went up, and when the interest rates were higher, projects got shelved. And companies like Ørsted and some others wound up, you know, so having to back away slightly from this. We have to win this battle, and we're not behaving like we have to win it.
As an anecdote, I can tell you.
But maybe before I let, I'm going to give you the floor. I'm just injecting again this also trade dimension in this, that we are eager to also go a little bit deeper on. So trade has...
But Birger, can I just say, with respect to that, we have, every country is now adopting its own industrial policy. Now, what changed in the trade sphere years ago when the same thing was happening? People said, well, this doesn't work. We can't do this. So we created the WTO. But the WTO failed because people went sort of outside of it. People backed off it. Politics got in the way, a whole bunch of things. It hasn't worked properly. So if we're going to, you know, we have to get the biggest nations, the biggest traders, to not disrupt the rest of the planet for the rest of the people who need a fair job, a fair shot. And I think that's a matter of getting through this election, and then we'll have a sense of what the challenge is. Hopefully, we are able to then sit down, all of us, those biggest trading nations, and come to some reasonableness standard about how we're going to trade.
I think this is exactly the dilemma we have, because when World Trade Organization was formed, it was to make sure that trade was going to flow as easily as possible, with the lowest possible cost. Also, comparative advantages. Also, the comparative advantages, and it did, of course, deliver also substantial growth. But we are now in a situation where we will, and I think this is the aim of this, discuss also, could we, in this intersection between trade and climate change sustainability also inject those parameters into trade. Unfortunately, WTO is not easy to get consensus around there because there is no consensus at all. But we do have the mega regional trade agreements. We also have the bilateral trade agreements. And those things that are coming up is also, of course, workers' rights, ESGs, but also climate. But we do run into, of course, the same challenges there on workers' rights, ESGs, and climate. The developing country would say this is something that the developed world is setting there. So I'm just
But I think you can work through.
We will go now to here first, and then we'll come back. So, Catherine, maybe comment on that.
Sure. First, I wanted to just say we agree with Secretary Kerry's urgency. We feel the urgency, and I think working people feel the urgency of having to get this done. They're being impacted every day. We've got 50 degrees Celsius heat in India, and the workers there. We just had a panel yesterday on heat stress and what it means for informal economy workers working in that heat, right, where they don't have the right not to work. And so I just want to say working people feel the urgency. Working people are really on the front lines of dealing with the fear-mongering and talking to each other. That's what we do. We go door to door, as you know. We knock on doors. We say, hey, this is a priority for all of us. So I think message one is bring us in from the beginning so that we feel like we are stakeholders in all of this. I also think that the WTO, I mean, there's so much discussion here about the WTO. There's creativity there. There's exceptions for some of the environmental pieces we might want to look at. In the United States, I think there's space for some facility-specific mechanisms that we built out in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement that has a rapid response mechanism on labor rights. We never experimented with that around climate. What if we find facilities that are actively violating environmental commitments under some of our trading agreements? We didn't experiment with that yet. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for the first time included some clauses around sustainability and then the environment. So I think it's a time for creativity. It's a time to be bringing these pieces together. And the last piece I would say in terms of building trust, we have example, we don't have the right social protection policies for workers and labor policies for workers to feel like they can trust this transition is going to work for them. In the U.S., we have the broken system of trade adjustment assistance that we can't get over the line. It's a program that helps workers who've been negatively impacted by trade policy. It's being opposed in the U.S. That sends a horrible message. But we need expansive new thinking around what does social protection look like in an age of this kind of climate change, the heat stress. You've been negatively impacted by the trade and climate nexus. What kind of social protection, what kind of floor do we need workers to be standing on to say, I know this transition is impacting me, but I have a floor, and I see I'm going to get skill training. I'm going to be able to transition with needed government support through social protection policies. So it's a time for robust, creative thinking. We can't do it with just one strand, thinking it's just a trade policy. I just really hope we can think about what are the labor policies, the social policies that will build trust in this very, very urgent transition that must happen.
Right. Laurence and then John.
So, agreeing totally with Catherine, we have to put that in a context where the concentration of wealth have been tremendous. So it's not only between countries, it's within countries. The 1% in China or in India or in Europe are the same. And that's one problem. So the just transition has to happen. The second element is, if I look at the bad trade policy from the US side, a good example is a deforestation ban. A ban of products that could potentially or really have impacted on deforestation. It's not a bad idea. The bad idea was not to discuss with the main exporting countries. And then draw innovative mechanism to accompany recognizing their efforts. And that is not the attitude because, again, we don't have the space in the WTO and we don't have a space to discuss that. So there is very nationalistic, even well-intended reaction. So, for example, if I would have to redo the deforestation ban law in EU, we could open the discussion, put timelines, accompany the process, recognize and monitoring the efforts. And that, for example, the discussion that is happening between Brazil and Europe today, and it's essential. You have to recognize that the people on the other side are not stupid. They want to protect the forest, that is some of them. So, and then you support the ones in the country, because of course it's a conflict of interest in Brazil, for example, because the one who want to burn the forest and the one who really protect it. But that playing a sort of big political economy, and we, for the moment, of course, the institutions were not equipped for that.
John?
Well, I'm not sure exactly which question is on the table, but...
You can define that.
No, well, I don't, look, I think, you know, I think we have to harness the power of the marketplace itself to make this transition work. And we have to be prepared, all of us, to fight for a process, for structure that is fair and equitable, that isn't going to exacerbate the wealth gap and so forth. And I think if you, I mean, money, but at the same time, you can't order BlackRock or Blackstone or whatever to say, take their billions, but they have clients. That money is owned by somebody else. And that money is owned and people are looking for a return on the investment. And so the real money that we have to try to affect this transition properly and create some kind of an equilibrium in the trading structure, that money is going to look for the fastest return on investment or the safest return on investment or a combination of the two. And that's how it works. So we have to be smarter and put the incentives out there. That's what the IRA is. President Biden and a whole bunch of folks voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, which has done an enormous amount to kick into higher gear, new battery factories, all kinds of alternative companies. I mean, that works, an incentive where people are free to choose where they're going to put their capital and invest. I think that's where we are now. We're sort of in a free-for-all where people are, you know, the system just isn't working. It's truly broken. And we've got to sit down and bring the largest trading countries together to the table and see if we can reestablish, work those rules in a way that creates some equilibrium in the marketplace. And then we have more freedom within which to reach out to the less developed countries and those emerging economies and help them over those hurdles so that there is not a building sense of inequity. System is rigged, only for the rich, only for the Western countries. And that's really unhealthy and dangerous for the entire planet. So if we want to move forward, we've got to build greater, you know, fairness and opportunity. Now, here's the deal. This moment begs for us to be providing those incentives in huge fashion to green products, to the green side of this equation. Otherwise, we will not move fast enough to get where we need to go. The ESG distortion that has taken place mostly from the United States is completely fraudulent. It is contrived. It was set up as part of the political strategy of scaring people and warding off this transition, which some people don't want. But this transition is going to happen. The world has made that decision. The only issue is what pace is it going to happen at? And so I think we have no choice. I don't think we have a lot of options. I keep coming back. We have to get through November 5th because nothing's going to happen here between now and then. And that's going to determine whether you're going into a whole hog tariff battle or whether you're going to have a more sensible and reasonable approach to actually encouraging green commerce. And we have a group of people who hate green commerce, who don't want to touch it, who are arguing for the same old, same old. That's really the choice that we face in 6 weeks. And I hope, obviously, that we're going to come out on the right side of the ledger, because we all saw for 4 years what happened when we pulled out of Paris, when we zero-funded all these other things. We lost credibility. The world sort of stalled in this transition. We can't afford to go through that again.
Thank you. We have time for a few short questions, but If I understand the panel right, the primary solution would be a global carbon tax, where you internalize the externalities. If you have a carbon tax, you will then...
Price on carbon.
Yeah.
We don't like taxes here.
Oh, no. Okay. Sorry, we're from Europe, you know. So the preferred would be a carbon
Let
price.
the market work on it.
Yeah. A carbon price where you then would incentivize investments in green technology, decarbonization, of course, because many companies would then prefer that than paying the price, so internalizing the externalities. It doesn't seem like it's happening just now. Then the border adjustment tax is then a way where if you produce a lot of CO2, emit a lot of CO2 in your production, you will have a levy and tax on your product when it arrives to that country. And then it creates a better level playing field between those that, for example, run everything on renewables, producing aluminum and steel, and those that then use possibly cheaper energy, but are then costing the planet a lot because it's heating. So if that doesn't work, what is then left there, I think industry policy is mentioned, where you then use kind of subsidies. I know that is not a word that Kerry will like either, but you incentivize by governmental money investments in accelerating decarbonization. These are three tools that you have on the table. Are there others? Are there other tools that we haven't mentioned so far that also will come up in Baku? Of course, we also, I would like to mention, though, the First Movers Coalition that John and I have been so eager on. Why is the First Movers Coalition unique? Because that's nothing that you can dispute, really, because these are the large 101 companies saying that we will use our purchasing power to green the supply chain. So if you're Apple, you say 25% of the aluminum we buy needs to be green. That, of course, sends a strong signal. This is not the strongest signal in the market, and everyone wants to sell to the Amazon, Apples of the world, and you can, of course, not like that the company is making that decision, but it is up to the companies owned by their own shareholders, and that is, of course, a fourth way of doing it, that the businesses themselves are sending such a strong signal. And then even if you are producing everything by coal, you will have to take this into your total assessment of the market. Are there other tools than what I just now mentioned?
Yes, you could shift subsidies.
Yeah.
We have vast array of subsidies that are actually subsidizing the problem, not the cure. It's about $1.some trillion. It's extraordinary to me. We still do that. If those subsidies were to shift, and subsidies aren't, you know, they're all over the world. I mean, Europe has a lot of subsidies. The U.S. has some subsidies. China has subsidies. Look at their solar industry and so forth. And that's because of the distortion.
Europe doesn't have subsidies for coal, though.
No, oh gosh, no. Oh. But no, not now. But no, I agree. There is a distinction. I'm not blessing the subsidy. I'm just saying, you know, but you have to work out that differential. But this transition could go a hell of a lot faster. Let me also emphasize, I am not saying that the private sector can do this literally all by itself. The permitting requires government. The subsidies, that's going to require parliaments and legislatures and so forth. There is a certain amount of policy that has to come into place through nations, you know, putting that vision into a way to make it happen, to deploy it without prejudice of, you know, some of the things that are happening today.
Any short questions from lady at the back there?
Great. Hi, Gail Whiteman, University of Exeter and the not-for-profit Climate Base Camp. I agree strongly that the need to incentivize markets is the way to move farther and faster, but could perhaps Secretary Carrie and the panelists could expand on the role of tackling climate misinformation on the solutions in the marketplace, because that seems to me that it's rife out there, both from business, investment, and consumer.
It's so tough. Everybody's wrestling with that right now. And I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's no, the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact have kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people go, and that people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change. Now, obviously, there are some people in our country who are prepared to implement change in other ways, and so that's really dangerous.
You're questioning really if democracy can survive unregulated social media.
I think democracies are very challenged right now, and have not proven they can move fast enough or big enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And to me, that is part of what this race, this election is all about. Will we break the fever in the United States? Will we bring ourselves back to a regular order, as John McCain used to say, where we're able to get things done, like a budget, pass a budget, for God's sakes. When I travel around the world, I'm pounded by people who say, what's the matter with America? Or where the hell are you guys going? And you all know, I'm not raising something new. It doesn't look good. It's not working well. And we have to be able to, and I've heard this from leaders in other countries. I won't mention their names, but some of them semi-adversarial. And they don't think our system works very well. And you look at it and you say,
your economy is going pretty well, though, John.
Yeah, but you know what? We proved in the early 1900s that robber baron capitalism can go and do a lot, and you can make a lot of people very wealthy. But if you're middle class and if you're people aspiring to get into the middle class are not able to go upwards, this has to be a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. And there's just too much bottom that's evident to too many people right now. And look at it, who got the $1 trillion tax cut? The top 1%. Exactly. That just tells you the whole story. And we're struggling to get the funding we need in order to be able to build the green products and make life better for people. So I'm sorry, I'll shut up.
No, we are in the middle of the U.S. election campaign here, I feel. And we know that Secretary Kerry is a very skilled campaigner. Catherine, and then we have one question in the back there. But
sure, I just wanted to say, from the labor movement, I always say that we are a lot of people's first experience with democracy, right? Democracy in the workplace. They feel like they actually have power. I don't have a magical answer. I agree with the Secretary. Social media is an enormous problem. The way we address it is from the bottom up. And so we are holding clean energy roundtables in states throughout the United States. We are talking about the positive. You mentioned Ørsted. They have a project labor agreement with our construction workers, really highlighting how this works. Democracy can be, so there's the top-down part of it. And I just wanted to bring in the part. There's also the bottom-up. I will be, after these meetings, heading out to another state to be working there for the next month, literally going door to door to door, talking to teachers, to grocery workers. It's the hard work of democracy. There is not an easy answer to it. And it's very frustrating. And I represent people of all political backgrounds, right? People believe that the labor movement in the U.S. is aligned with one, but we represent people who really have distrust and questions. I've heard this in social media. So I really want to emphasize, and we're seeing this with my union partners around the world, from Germany, and what do we do with the AFD? What do we do? It's the hard work of talking to the people that trust you. They trust us as an information source. And so we are taking advantage of that. Like I said, holding clean energy roundtables, talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, why it's good for working people. And that is a bottom-up approach of getting information, real information, in your community. This is what the investment looked like in red communities, right? Workers want to hear, well, it's in my community, but right now I only see the construction. I don't see the manufacturing. It's coming. It's not there yet. There is a gap. The IRA money is going to take a while. You are building offshore wind, but the manufacturing supply chain hasn't been built out yet. So I just wanted to bring that in the conversation. This is hard work. Democracy takes people talking to each other, and social media is making it very, very hard with all of the misinformation. So the labor movement's approach, and we are coordinating this globally. We have a democracy campaign at the ITUC precisely because this is such a big issue in absolutely every single country we are working in.
I want to know what state to the north of us merits that much of your time.
I'm actually going west.
I got the state. Okay.
Like you, just before we go to the gentleman there, I think we have some good news on this, though, the willingness also on the consumers to take responsibility. Kimberly, didn't we do a report or a survey with EY or something on this, with consumers being willing to also pay a bit extra if workers' rights and environment was part of it? Maybe you can say 2 words about that.
Yeah, that is correct. So there is some work that EY has done, indeed, and we've highlighted that consumers are willing to pay up to 13% more for a green premium if you can get that validation. And this is where it comes back to really making sure that the data will be passed through the supply chain, because we cannot have false green claims, linking this to what we were just saying about social media. We need to have real green claims so that consumers are willing to pay that 13% extra, and they will.
Yeah, I think this makes me, we also have to be a bit optimistic in the sense that if companies are using their purchasing power to green and set standards, and consumers are also willing to do their job, that can come in addition to what the governments do. Short question there, that will be the last one, and then we'll wrap up the panel.
Hi, my name is Vikram Iyer. I head a policy for a carbon removal credit seller. And I just want to thank you and Secretary Kerry, the forum, and Secretary Kerry for the first Movers Coalition. We've sold into that in partnership with other buyers, and it's been hugely catalytic. One of the things that I wanted to tie was Secretary Kerry's reflection on our pacing on CBAMs, as well as the threat about worker protections. We have built a carbon removal facility, a direct air capture facility in California, fully built by union labor. And when we think about policy to encourage more carbon management, carbon removals to hit our net zero targets as countries, as states, as a globe, one of the biggest challenges that we face is that some of the older industry energy majors are heavily unionized. And so when you start to set carbon border adjustment mechanisms, whether it's a carbon price or a compliance market, some of the biggest obstacles to that are the political power that the energy majors could have in tandem with labor unions in states that are poised to do that kind of thing, like California or other blue states. Just curious if you could reflect on how carbon pricing and compliance mechanisms can help unlock more of this type of emissions trading frameworks, and what the role for partnering with labor there is, that given that it tugs at old industries.
Is a question to...
I'm sure Catherine has a lot to say, but just an experience we have lived through in Europe. We have a carbon price on power because we have a market. And I saw in a very coal-based country like Poland, so the electricity was 65% produced by coal. And the bigger company of electricity in Poland had decided to go totally 100% renewable by 2035. It is, they have coal mine, they have coal power plant. And how they did that, on one side, they use some of the economic instrument you referred to, But on the other side, it was discussing with the miners and with the people working in the company. And that this process, it's at the same time the price. So the guy owning the company say, oh, it's costing me a lot. The children of this guy saying, fathers, what are you doing for climate? But the extraordinary social experience, and we saw the same in Spain on the coal mine and the coal thermal plant, the discussion with the workers and the local authorities was a way to accelerate the transition and the process. So I think it's not one instrument. It's a series and a face-to-face discussion. And he has this guy, the head of this company, said it's a social experiment. For the moment, yes, because it's not totally everybody doing that, it's a social experiment. But I do think that combining the two, the force of the market and the real discussion face-to-face on this transition, we can get there, even in a country that was just living through coal for 2 centuries almost.
We have now 1 minute left, so I give you, John, 1 minute, and then Catherine 1 minute.
Well, I think you asked about how the carbon pricing could have an impact in positive ways. Is that correct? So let me could take you very quickly back. How many of you remember acid rain? How many of you talk about it today? Nobody. And the reason you don't talk about it today is because we created a market. We gave value, and sulfur has been reduced because it's been traded, and there's a responsible way that people have then changed the way they approach the production of that sulfur. Also, scrubbers and all the changes in the industry. So that's the theory behind if you have a price on carbon. If you have a price on carbon, people are, you all of a sudden change people's choices for what they build, how they build, where they deploy what. And that's how you begin to change it. Now, Europe has a much greater disposition, I don't say this derogatorily, but for regulation. We have less of an inclination for regulation, more of a disposition for some kind of market incentive and let the market decide what they're going to do. But that's what the pricing would effect do. Now, I have no illusions. This ain't going to happen really soon. I don't see it being implemented in the very near term because it will be weaponized like so much of what is happening in our politics. It will be called a tax, and people will run away from it. So there's a core group that is now trying to come together around it, and we'll see what happens. But the other things, I mean, over time, there are going to be a lot of things that get built into the economy of the future that are going to accelerate this transition. And I think that, you know, that will come out of the IRA and these other things now, of course, in the next years. Look, Solar Plus now. Not just solar, Solar Plus, which means major shift in storage, the amount of storage. Europe is getting, Germany's at about 50% renewable. They're aiming to get to 80% renewable. This is going to happen. And it's just really, as I said earlier, a question of how fast.
Thank you. Catherine?
I'll probably, you know, end where I started, and it goes to your question, really. Most people don't know what carbon pricing is. And so what happens when you haven't been part of shaping or being engaged in the conversation, you dig in. Because the experience in the United States, the lived experience is if I give up that good union job, I don't know what's on the other side. You know, my country is not giving trade adjustment assistance. We have pretty weak social protection, no national health care, right? Like, I'm going to dig in, unlike some other social protections that Europe has that allows people to say, well, maybe, you know, I'll get some training and I'll have a floor to transition. So I guess my answer is, one, we have a lot of education to do around carbon pricing. That is not, there's, in the labor movement here in the United States, there are different opinions, so we don't have a consolidated position on that. I would encourage in places where you're working, have that conversation, bring them in. What is it? What would it take? Ask the question, what would it take to transition? What is needed for you to feel secure enough, right, for your industry to change? I mean, these are really powerful questions that I will tell you rarely get asked. And I go back to the example on offshore wind. A lot of those sectors were initially sectors that were seen by the environmental community as resisting change, right? The construction sector was like, we're not going to, we want to build pipelines. And the moment that company investment came in with strong protections and we care about your wages and we care about, we'll do offshore wind the right way, there was great support for it. And so that's what we're trying to do. What I've busily been doing with the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'll end on this point, is trying to encourage the investment coming in be a win-win investment. Let's address the urgency of the climate change, challenges, and at the same time, let's build good jobs. So it's a win-win, and I really think we can do it, and I think that is where we need to go as we look at trade, climate, and other kinds of labor and social policies.
Thank you. I would like, on behalf of those that have been listening and myself, to take the panel. It's been more than 1 hour in very deep discussions on the toolkit that we have available and also the possible trade-offs between the different solutions. I found it very insightful. I think we were privileged to have a great panel, so I suggest that we give them a big applause. Thank you.